Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual Q&A for the National Geographic series, Secret of the Whales. My name is Chris Lemaire, and I'm a programmer at the American Cinematheque. And I'm so happy to present this conversation with the series underwater photographer, Brian Skerry, and also the composer, Raphaelle Thibaut. Our moderator for tonight is Cara Santa Maria, the host of the podcast Talk Nerdy. Before we start, I just want to thank National Geographic, our partners on the event. We're so grateful to them for allowing us to put on this week-long National Geographic Spotlight. So let's go ahead and turn it over to Cara and welcome our guests.
Hello, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here with Brian and Raphaelle. And I think probably the first thing that we all want to know, just diving right in, is from you, Brian, how did this amazing, I don't want to say series, I want to say project, this endeavor come about?
Oh, well, hi, everyone. Thanks, Cara. Great to see you, Raphaelle, again. And yeah, to answer that question, Cara, for a little bit of context, the last big whale project I did for National Geographic was about the most endangered whale in the world, the North Atlantic right whale. And I did that in 2008. And since that time, I'd been interested in doing a multi-species story about whales. I love whales. I love spending time with them in the ocean. It's quite special. But the challenge for doing a multi-species story for me was, what was the narrative going to be? How can I connect the dots? So I read a lot of scientific papers, talked to researcher friends, attended conferences, and I noticed this notion of culture, the fact that scientific literature was publishing the fact that whales were doing things differently in different parts of the world within a genetically identical species, and this was described as culture. And I started talking to specific researchers, one in particular, Dr. Shane Garrow, who studies sperm whales, and he began to tell me a little bit more about this notion of culture. He said, for example, that one way to describe the difference between behavior and culture is this. It's that behavior is what we do, culture is how we do it. So most humans, for example, eat food with utensils. That is behavior, but whether you use chopsticks or knives and forks is your culture. And while whales are not using utensils, they are doing things differently within a given species. So I extrapolated out to different species and saw a really unique story here. So much of my work over the years has evolved from just wanting to do stories about cool things that interested me to a lot of environmental work. I saw so many problems occurring in the world's oceans, so focused on problems and solutions. But with Secrets of the Whales, it was not overtly about conservation, yet it could really have that dividend. It could be extremely consequential, because if we begin to see the natural world through the lens of another species culture, that is indeed a game changer. So that was the evolution of the project, and then it all sort of grew organically from there.
I have so many follow-up questions. There's so much I want to get into, but before we dive a little bit more into the culture, I want to stick with some of the technical components of it. So Brian, what, other than actually filming, a large portion of the footage for this series, what was your role? Were you a producer? Were you an executive producer? How were you involved in the day-to-day?
Yeah, great question. Well, so I created it, and then, I was doing a story for National Geographic magazine about this. I was doing a book, and then the series, of course, was an integral part of that whole equation. So my role was as a producer on the series. I didn't actually shoot the film footage. I was in most of the locations, working with the camera teams that Red Rock Productions, who was hired to do the production work, brought in. Many of which were colleagues of mine that I'd worked with over the years. And we would, sort of go to the locations, many of which I had researched in advance, to tell this story, within budgetary limitations and time limitations. We had 3 years, 24 locations, essentially from the equator to the poles, with 4 or actually 5 different species that we felt would provide that narrative and give audiences a real sense of these animals' cultures, their personalities, the things that they celebrate, the things that are important to them, and hopefully offer an insight into the ocean that we haven't quite seen before.
It's funny you say that you didn't actually do most of the footage. You were actually on camera for a fair amount of this. So other people were filming you taking photographs of the whales and observing them. And it's really cool how periodically in the series, we get to see those stunning stills come to life, kind of in situ. So I want to kind of turn to you for a second, Raph, and I want to ask you about your role in the project because you had a unique job, didn't you?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, at first I was really like, when I saw the images for the first time, I was like, I am never going to be able to top that because this is already music. This is already so beautiful. I mean, I'm not gonna be able to top that. And because I was so shocked in a good way by exactly what just, Brian mentioned, the fact that these animals are so similar to us. I kind of knew that already because I've always been fascinated, by whales, like a lot of people, but I didn't know that they were so similar to us, and how they are emotionally similar to us at so many levels as well. So I was not expecting to be able to relate that much, to some of the stories that we see. For example, this orca mother, who like she's literally carrying her dead calf for days because she can't let go, and she mourns like us, like we would do. And that, to me, because I was also a young mother back then, I had a few months baby at home, I related so much, and it was one of the most challenging and incredible at the same time scene to score to for that reason. So that was a surprise to me, and it was an amazing one.
Yeah. And so, really doing the score for something so compelling, something so visual, you had to work to sort of match the visual impact with an auditory impact as well. And, the thing that really strikes me about a series like this, and maybe we'll volley this back to you, Brian, but I'd love to hear from you as well, Raph, is that the story itself is somewhat constructed. It's observed, but it has to be put to a name. When we talk about what we think of as a classic documentary, where we're following people around and we're observing their behavior, they get to tell us what they're thinking. They get to tell us what they're feeling. But when you tell stories about animals, and especially about these really kind of large and compelling undersea mammals, a fair amount of the storytelling has to be interpreted by the filmmakers. And so I'm wondering, how do you go about doing that and finding that balance between not anthropomorphizing too much, but also ensuring that their individual, personalities come through?
Well, that's a really great analysis, Cara, because I think what we were trying to do here was a bit different than what had been done in the past. Certainly, many other science films or nature documentaries, certainly ones that I've worked on or work that I've done, tend to be, for lack of a better word, a little clinical. We sort of take this 35,000 foot view and we look at these animals and we see ourselves apart from them and sort of observe their behaviors and think of it scientifically. And it can be wonderful and beautiful, for visually. But I think what we were trying to do with Secrets of the Whales was integrate into these societies to a degree. I mean, when I'm in the water with them, I can only make pictures if they allow me into their world. I don't have the luxury that a terrestrial photographer has. I can't sit in a camouflage blind for a month at a time and use a 600 millimeter lens and wait for some elusive animal to wander past. I'm holding my breath. I'm free diving. I'm not even using scuba. So I don't want to scare the whales. I have to be nimble. So it's just a mask, snorkel, and fins and a wetsuit. And if the animal doesn't want me there, they swim away. But with the whales, inevitably, if you spend enough time, they do allow you into their world. And you do get to witness these cultural aspects. You see their families, you see the tenderness between moms and calves, or family dynamics, socializing. And in terms of the story, the narrative, this is where the research, so I had done research for several years, sort of building out what I thought could be done visually in terms of storytelling. So it was being able to go into some of these families that have unique dialects, languages, for lack of a better analogy. So for example, sperm whale families that we worked with in Dominica, the scientist Shane Garrow has studied those animals for 15 years. He's done what nobody has been able to do before. He identified about 24 whale families that all speak the same language, the same dialect, and he determined that they do not intermingle with other genetically identical sperm whales that speak a different language that move into those waters. The first thing the researchers say that a sperm whale does when it meets another whale in the middle of the ocean is to say where they are from. They say, I am from Dominica. And if the other whale says, I am from Haiti or someplace, they just casually go their own way. So when I heard that, I imagine the neighborhoods of New York at the turn of the last century, you know, the Irish and the Italians and all these little language enclaves. And I said, how remarkable, and started looking at different aspects of whale culture. So that was the storyboard. You know, we wanted to be able to capture visually and, you know, with audio, the sounds of these dialects, let's say, of sperm whales in the Caribbean, and then go to the Azores, and then go to Sri Lanka and look at different whale populations. First time that a scientist like Shane had done this. So when he's putting on the headphones and he hears it, it's a bit of an aha moment. So that's one aspect. The fact that orca have a preference for ethnic foods. They have an interest in international cuisines. The orca that live in New Zealand like to eat stingrays, and they are the only orca in the world that have mastered a technique for swimming into shallow mangroves and harbors and grabbing stingrays and feeding on them, while the same species on the other side of the world in Patagonia likes to predate on sea lion pups. And the only 2 families in the world have figured out how to do that. So, you know, those were sort of the hopes that we wanted. We knew we wanted to get feeding strategies. We wanted to get dialects and languages. We wanted to get male humpback whales singing, which has been described in scientific literature as the horizontal transmission of culture. So, you know, we sort of built those blocks of what the stories were going to be with a very ambitious wish list. And then we not only achieved that, but we got so much more. You know, the sad moments, as Raphaelle described, of an orca mom carrying her dead calf, or a female orca in New Zealand attempting to feed me one of the stingrays, you know, welcoming me to dinner, or many of the other things. Beluga whales, you know, we built specially designed cameras and captured behavior that hadn't been seen before in very shallow water estuary ecosystems in the Canadian Arctic, and saw newborn baby belugas and gameplay where they pick up little stones and play with the stones as a game of catch. So many of these other things that we would have never been so bold as to put down on a shot list.
Oh, I love that. And Raphaelle, you know, I'm interested in your take, because again, telling these kinds of stories requires a certain finesse, and it requires a certain amount of storytelling construction. And a big part of that really is the music, the shifting and the changing from a happy moment to a sad moment, coasting, communicating, loving, fighting. You know, how did you tap in, and how were you able to sort of tell those stories audibly so that the audience could really connect with the emotion that the whales were putting off?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's true that, you know, to follow up also on what Brian just said, you know, it's funny that sometimes it almost felt, for me at least, that the show was like dramatically structured, you know, like fiction would be. And again, that was not something I was expecting from a documentary. So that was a nice surprise, you know, because it's always so much easier for, I think, a composer to be able to relate more, and then to tell stories, you know, and to be able to, you know, to put yourself into someone else's or some other species' shoes, if I may say. And so I think in terms of the changes in moods, and it's so true. And I think it's very also specific to wild documentaries, you know, where you go from a playful scene to a dramatic, tragic moment, and then to something playful again. And that's a little bit like in animation. And it's tricky because you want to be powerful. You want to send like a powerful musical message, but you have sometimes a very short time to do so. So that was very interesting to work on indeed. And I think, you know, the production team, Red Rock Films, they've been very specific and very helpful in the way they didn't tell me what to do. They just, guided me when, they just told me, okay, this is the emotion we want to convey at this point. Do whatever you want, but this is how we want to feel. And this really helped. And I also had like some temp tracks to work to, just to, temporary tracks, just to make sure that we were aligned, because it was changing so much and so fast. So in that specific case, it was very helpful. And yeah, it was also fascinating and very, very, fun for me to do, because I could literally go rogue and use 3 different genres in 30 seconds. And I really, really loved that.
Oh, I love that. So there are in some ways more constraints, it being a nature documentary, but in some ways there's like more of an openness to it. And
absolutely. There were actually, it's funny that you say that, because I found that in that, for the specific show, it was very much about that. There was a lot of limitations, but a lot of freedom. So it was really a mix of both. And it was so interesting, because the same also applied to the fact that we couldn't have live players. So I had to do a score that would be completely digital. There's no live players in what you can hear. And so there were so many limitations due to that. Sometimes you have to work around the melody, the instrumentation, because it's not going to sound authentic enough, so you have to work around that, change stuff that you don't want to change sometimes. But at the same time, it allows you to like there's so much more freedom in if I want to have 200 strings there, or add so much more electronic elements, I can still do it. This is basically just me, my box and my piano, and I can do whatever. So and there's the whole show was a lot about that, about like challenges, limitations versus like tons of freedom. So that was so interesting.
Yeah, and I could see that in the visual storytelling, and of course the auditory storytelling as well. I want to turn for a second to some of the incredible questions that are coming in from the viewers right now. This first one struck me especially, Brian, because you were already referencing a handful of things that really speak to this question. Did you feel after the cameras were introduced that the whale started acting for the camera, kind of the way humans do? And you mentioned the orca who basically offered you the ray that they had just hunted. There are times when they really did notice you and welcome you.
Yeah, in my book, Secrets of the Whales, I sort of describe the levels of encounters with whales. And, the first would be that they are completely uninterested, and as you sort of get within visibility range of them underwater, they sense your presence and just slowly swim the other way. The other is that they sort of tolerate you. They're indifferent. They may be socializing and they know, of course, you're there as a bit of a voyeur, but they don't really care. And then there is that engagement where it becomes, very special. It's a rarefied experience to ascend to that plane where that's happening. So I think, with the cameras, are they, hamming it up for the cameras? I would say that in rare cases that happens when I'm in the water, but where I really think it happened was with these newly designed remote cameras that I placed in the Canadian Arctic for beluga whales. This is a place, I call it Beluga Beach, because these are animals that spend the wintertime when it's totally dark in the waters near Greenland. And then when the sun emerges in summertime and it's light 24 hours a day, they migrate hundreds of kilometers through the Northwest Passage of Canada and end up at this place called Cunningham Inlet in Somerset Island. It's an uninhabited island. It's in the high Arctic. And they move into this estuary system where the rivers flow into the sea. The water is a few degrees warmer, so it's a great place for the moms to have their babies. But you're not allowed to go in the water there. And if I stuck as much as my toe in the water, 1,000 whales would have stampeded out. They would feel very vulnerable. But as long as they're able to do their thing, it's just this amazing place where they're rubbing on the gravel bottom as if a natural loofah to exfoliate their skin. And it's like a day at the spa. They're spinning around and playing and doing all these things. So I was a little nervous about putting the cameras in this place because I didn't know how they would react. And you could see them. I could stand on the riverbank, on the shoreline bank, and watch them moving into the place where the cameras were. And sometimes they'd swim around it. And then in the end, the footage we got was very much that they were hamming it up and posing, little baby beluga swimming right up to the camera. Or sometimes they would come over and mouth the dome port on the camera. So yeah, and then with the orca, feeding me the ray, at that moment, I had just come from 6 weeks in the Canadian Arctic, and then I went direct to New Zealand to try to capture this rare behavior of orca feeding on stingrays. So we get a call one morning at 6 a.m. I jump in the vehicle. We drive 3 hours north. I'm with a scientist, Dr. Ingrid Visser, who's dedicated her life to figuring out these animals. We go out in her boat. She says, all right, now's a good time to get in. I'm in the water. I'm swimming towards the orca. And here comes this adult female with a stingray hanging out of her mouth. So my mind is on overload. I just want to get the shot. And then she drops the ray. And I'm heartbroken. I'm like, oh no, I didn't get it. So I swim down to the bottom. The ray is laying on the bottom of the sandy sea floor. And I'm just kneeling on the bottom. And then the whale comes, out of my right side of my vision, swims behind my back, and then positions herself directly in front of me with the ray in between us. And she's looking at me and looking at the ray as if to say, I'm giving you this. I wasn't really thinking that so much at the time. I remember after talking to James Cameron, our executive producer, who said, well, Brian, so many cultures offer food as a sort of a welcome, and you clearly were a rude guest. So because I didn't eat the ray, I felt bad about that. But so who knows? I mean, as you said, I don't want to anthropomorphize too much. But that being said, the scientists that we're working with here, this is all rooted in science. I mean, this is all fundamental science. We're not going far afield here and trying to say anything that isn't untrue. And beyond that, we can only imagine. We don't know everything about these animals, and they still have far more secrets that they're keeping from us. But, hopefully in time, we'll learn more.
What a wonderful story. And it's so cool to be able to see that unfolding right in front of us on film.
Yeah, and that's a testament to the cameraman, Kinna Scole, a great director of photography, who was in the water with me. I didn't even see him. I was so engrossed with the orca, and he was there getting this great scene on film.
Incredible. So I've got another question here from the viewers, and I love this one. It's a two-parter. Number one, when did Sigourney Weaver become involved in the project? And two, Raphaelle, did you create the score with her voice in mind as the narrator? How much was her voice and really who she is influencing your work?
I'll just jump in quickly on that and let Raphaelle take the rest. But, I think many of us in the production side, from the very beginning, always thought that Sigourney Weaver was the perfect choice. I know I did. I was talking about it with my assistants and my crew, and I know Brian Armstrong at Red Rock, he said that when he was asked to submit names for a narrator, I think they asked for like 2 or 3 choices, and he put Sigourney's name down 3 times. Because, probably for the same reasons, we were thinking that she just has this, obviously she's a brilliant actress, but she has this calm, clear, confident voice. And from my perspective, many of these whale families are matrilineal. They are led by the wiser, stronger females of the group. And she just embodied that to me. And of course, I knew she had worked with Cameron on projects. She's working on Avatar 2 right now, or was. So I hoped secretly that would happen. And it was sort of toward the end, I think, of, when the editing process was beginning to happen, when that all came together and Sigourney became part of it. But yeah.
Very cool. And so when did you know, Raph, were you aware as you were starting to score?
I think I knew about it halfway. I think I started writing music to a scratch audio first. That was a male voice, right? And so I kind of got used to it, but then halfway, so I thought it would be a male voice at the end. And so halfway I knew about Sigourney, and of course I was like over the moon because I'm such a fan. And and then I think I've worked maybe a little more than one episode to her voice. And I just, as Brian just said, it really felt that it struck me that whale societies are led by females, like a lot. They play such an important role. The mothers, the grandmothers, the sisters, and so when I heard her voice to this, I mean, I was already like, enchanted when I knew that would be her, but then I heard her voice to the show and I was like, this makes so much sense. And I'm so glad that they made the decision. I don't know. I think she has this like incredibly deep, motherly, warm voice that added so much to the pictures and to the music. And I was beyond, I was over the moon and honored.
Yeah. And
to have my music associated to her voice.
Yeah, her voice really operates on two levels, the way that the music operates on two levels, the way that the visuals operate on two levels. I love this about Secrets of the Whales and about some, not all, but some nature documentaries in general, that there is a really compelling edge of the seat component to it, but it's also like what I want to watch when I'm at the dentist office. You know what I mean? Like it's so calming and meditative, and you really can zen out when you sort of connect with this underworld, this watery world that is fantastic and at the same time incredibly relaxing. Although I can imagine, Brian, it's not always relaxing when you're down there, is it?
Well, only because you have to get the shot, right? That's where the stress comes in. If I had a nickel for every time National Geographic told me, Mr. Skerry, we don't publish excuses, I could have retired long ago. But yeah, I think, but you raise a good point, and that is that when you're having these experiences, I think, for my brain, it sort of works in two buckets, two components. And one is, I'm very much attuned to the light and where the sun is in position to me, and is the animal lit, and what are the various corners of the frame looks like. I'm trying to make a picture. But you're also very aware of the animals. Sometimes, if I'm working with potentially dangerous animals, schools of sharks or saltwater crocodiles, you're especially vigilant because, there's a danger element, but not so with whales. But it's a euphoria. And I think that's a big part of it. And, in the sperm whale episode in Secrets of the Whales, actually, there's a scene where I had this extraordinary experience with a sperm whale calf. This was a young animal, maybe 6-month-old, that had been born to a family that had struggled to produce female calves. In recent years, they had mostly only produced male calves, and those had died. And again, because they're matrilineal societies, it is the females who will maintain those families. The males, when they get to about age 14 or so, they go off. So, for a family to survive, they needed little girls. And we went down this particular year, it was 2018, and this family had a new baby girl. And I got to name her Hope. The scientists give these whales names, and they asked me, and I said Hope, and they liked it, so that stuck. So there was one day where I was in the water with Hope, and she was playing in this sargassum weed, this beautiful yellow weed that we had seen her mom playing in. I think it had a rough texture, and it nicely scratches their back. So she was playing, and I was in the water for over an hour with her, which never happens with something like a whale. And I say in the film that at some point I just, let my camera down by my side because I just wanted to soak it up. I wanted to enjoy that experience. In 4 decades of exploring the world's oceans, I've never had that kind of a experience, and I may never have one again. And I didn't want to see it only through the viewfinder, because I had over an hour of time.
Oh, I love that. And, I think it speaks to another beautiful question that came up from the listeners. And maybe your answer is Hope, but maybe you have a secondary answer as well. Was there an individual whale that you were especially drawn to or connected with? And I posed that question to both of you, Brian, while you were there in the moment having the experience, and Raph, when you were looking at the footage and when you were starting to really develop the beautiful sounds that accompany the footage. So we'll start with you, Brian. Maybe other than Hope, or maybe Hope is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in every episode, in every one of the genres of whales, beluga whales, sperm whales, humpbacks, or orca, there are these incredible moments, as I said, that you couldn't predict. But many of those were sort of one-off. You know, I would be in New Zealand, I had the stingray moment, but I didn't get to spend more time with that particular family. With Hope and her family in the Caribbean, I made 3 or 4 trips to Dominica. That was one of the fundamental building blocks of my story. That was where it all began, with the sperm whales of the Eastern Caribbean. So I went there repeatedly. You know, one year I went for 5 weeks. I did a 5-week trip, and in the first 19 days, we didn't see a single whale. The scientist was telling me, you know, this has never happened before, which is not what you want to hear from the scientist, but you know, inevitably some great things happened. But I got to know that family that Hope was a part of. So yes, Hope certainly, because she also, we were able to film the first time a sperm whale calf had ever been seen nursing from its mom. Hope was nursing from her mom. They were down about 40 or 50 feet. The mother was sort of upside down, laying on her back. And again, we're free diving down. So free dived down and was able to move in close enough to get these very first pictures. Shane, the scientist, told me that evening, he said, you know, there's an old saying in the whale biology world that says someday we will know everything there is to know about whales except how a sperm whale calf nurses, because they could never figure it out with that big lower jaw. They just didn't know how it worked. But this, you know, so scientifically, that was a great thing for science. But for me, this was an extremely trusting mom who, you know, with her new calf, her new baby, was so tolerant to let me, and in this case, my assistant, close to be able to get those scenes. So I'd have to say that family, but you know, Hope and her mom particularly were at the top of the list.
Stunning. And what about you, Raph? When you were watching the footage and really developing the beautiful sounds that go along with it, was there any one story or any one individual whale that really spoke to you?
I mean, I'll have to say the mother, you know, Arca, because that's, you know, that really is when I was really struck by those incredible acts of generosity and love, you know, and in the world. And you know, we always think, you know, eat or be eaten, you know, they're animals, we're different. And to me, that's the moment when that was really a shift for me. Like, it really was a shift in my brain, like, okay, they're like us. And like, I actually want to hug her. I want to do anything to console her, to, you know, relieve her from her pain. And I was not expecting to feel this way about an animal. So I'll have to say that. I have to tell the mother Arca, the morning mother, as you know, there's actually a song in the soundtracks that's called the morning mother, and it's also my favorite cue in the whole show. So it happens
I
to
love that.
You know, the story behind that as well, which I know Raphaelle knows, but Cara, so that scene of the orca mom carrying her dead calf in the Norwegian Arctic, that happened on Thanksgiving Day here in America. So I've been working for National Geographic for about 23 years, and I often travel 8 or 9 months a year. But I've always managed to be home for Thanksgiving. And that was the first time I was away from my own family. And, you know, I was up there, it was days away from the polar night when it's going to be dark 24 hours a day. I woke up that morning sort of thinking about my family home, eating turkey and celebrating and wishing I was there. But I pulled on my wetsuit, we got on the boat, it was cold and gray and snowy. And we saw this orca family moving very purposely through the fjord. So I made a number of dives, you know, free dives down, eventually got close and saw this mom with the dead calf, you know, sort of draped over her head, and the family sort of closing ranks around her. And then we got the drone footage from the scientist as well. But, you know, on a day when I sort of started off thinking one thing, I was totally, you know, derailed by something that can only be described as grief, this sort of funeral procession. So yeah, Raphaelle makes a really good point. You just want to hug that mom and you know, empathize with her.
Yeah, it's just incredible how much this species that we think of as being so far away from who we are. I mean, we know scientifically and we know cognitively that this is a mammalian species, and it's an intelligent mammalian species that shares so many evolutionary components with us. But because I think of the environment in which whales live, that's almost so alien to us and so foreign to us, sometimes we feel very far away from them. And so these really beautiful stories that evoke in us a deep human empathy, I think that's what really connects us, especially to the work that you guys did in this series. So, we only have time for a couple more questions, and I want to make them really impactful. So one of them that came up from some viewers today, which I think is a really important question, and I'd pose this to both of you, is what do you feel is the biggest threat to these species today?
Right.
And maybe what can we do about it?
My answer to that would be that I think it's important to remember or recognize that even though we are terrestrial creatures and we see our world from that terrestrial centric viewpoint, that if you look at Earth from space, you can instantly see that we very much live on a water planet. It's often been said that about 3/4 of the Earth's surface is ocean, and that's true, but 98% of the biosphere, 98% of the livable, habitable planet where life can exist on Earth is water, is ocean. Every other breath that a human being takes comes from the sea. It is the greatest carbon sink on our planet. It takes in more carbon and gives us back more than 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. Yet we have treated it very poorly. We used to think it was too big to fail, but it's not. In the last 60 years, we have taken 90% of the big fish in the ocean out of the ocean. We kill 100 million sharks every year. We've lost half the world's coral reefs. We dump 18 billion pounds of plastic into the ocean every year. And we dump so much carbon into the atmosphere that the ocean's chemistry is changing. It is becoming acidic, ocean acidification, which erodes anything with calcium. So coral reefs or seashells or pteropods, which are baseline sources of protein for whales in many cases. So rather than looking at an individual species, I think we just need to perhaps be better stewards, custodians of this planet. As Buckminster Fuller said in the 1970s, it's spaceship Earth and no chance of resupply. So I think, one of the hopes, I guess, for Secrets of the Whales for me is that audiences do see the planet or the ocean at a minimum through the lens of another species' culture, these rich families that celebrate things much the way that we do, and maybe we care a little bit more about our actions as a result. So I think, being an informed consumer, an informed citizen, making choices about what you buy or who we elect, or people that support conservation and science. I mean, I think all of these things are important. So that's how we can help the whales and help ourselves.
Yeah. And, Raph, I was going to pose that question to you, but something else has come up that I feel like is just, I'd be really remiss if I didn't ask you. And so I was wondering from you, what do you think, being involved in this project, that you've learned about how or what the behavior of these different whales has taught us about ourselves, about what it means to be human?
Well, I think that well, if I had to answer the first question actually that you asked, I would say just watch the show. And to first start, with watching the show, because to me, it just tackles something that I've never seen before in any, documentaries about whales. And I think not even any wild documentaries, is the fact that it's not, it's not about blaming us for what we're doing wrong. It's all about positive and incredibly inspiring and beautiful, relatable images of creatures, that we share this big rock with. And to me, that was something that I'd never seen before. And I would also say that just the act of listening to the whale singing, and we hear a lot of that in the show, can also help. I mean, I have to answer this way as a composer, as a musician, because I was fascinated by the music those animals make since I was a kid. And this is through their songs and their music. And, you know, for me personally, it happened with this film in the 80s, The Big Blue. It's a French movie about this diver, the true story of this diver, who's so fascinated by how deep he can go and, you know, into the ocean. And the score for this movie is incredible because the composer has recreated those whale sounds. I was maybe, I don't know, 8 when I watched it the first time, and I remember being shocked and being like so inspired by those songs, and I couldn't believe that they would come, you know, from animals, and that they, you know, animals could make that kind of sound and that kind of, you know, sensitive and emotional sounds. And that's what made me feel closer to those animals very early on in my life and being fascinated by them. So yeah, I'd say just listen, watch the show and listen to the music those animals make, because it's beautiful.
Oh, I love that. And Brian, you know, I want to kind of turn back to you. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but one of the questions again that that our listeners or our viewers brought up was, you know, what do you feel that whale behavior tells us about human behavior, about what it means to be human? And I know that you and I were talking a bit offline a little bit about some of the insights that you developed, especially having, you know, lived through this global pandemic and having dealt with some of the constraints that we've all had to kind of try and maintain resiliency through, that there have been some really profound takeaways for you, haven't there?
Yeah, very much so. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the nature of my life for the last 2 decades has been on a bit of a hamster wheel, you know, traveling 8 or 9 months a year, sometimes more, and particularly so for the 3 years that we did Secrets of the Whales. And then it came to a full stop. I literally came home in mid-March from Hawaii with doing humpback whales last year, and I haven't been to an airport since. So in the time since then, in lockdown and with my family, which was a silver lining, of course, I did reflect a lot on my time with the whales. And I think what I sort of came away with was not so much that they taught me anything I didn't know, but that they reminded me of what I do know. I gave a commencement address recently, and I was telling the students, you know, about vocation and ambition is all good, but, you know, don't overlook those moments every day that are in your life that'll enrich your life with family and community. And, you know, I gave the analogy of sperm whales. These are, if you've read Moby Dick, you have this historical context of a Leviathan smashing ships and so forth. But what we know from science is this is the animal with the biggest brain on Earth, and they are shy and gentle, and they live in families. But life is hard in the ocean. They spend most of their days 600, 700 meters deep looking for squid, and they're in the open ocean. They have to contend with fishing gear and toxins and all these things. But yet every day they make time to come together as a family to socialize. If you spend time with them, you'll see these socializing moments where they just rub against each other. They close their eyes in what I would describe as bliss. They know that reaffirming those bonds, community with each other is important. I think that gives them the inspiration to go back and do it the next day. So same with beluga whales, you know, they're up there in the Arctic. It's a harsh environment. And yet we captured behavior of them playing with little stones. They pick up the stone and swim with it and then pass it to another one. And, you know, how wonderful is that? So I think for me anyway, it was about remembering that we need each other. We are mammals on land. They are mammals in the ocean. We have big brains. They have big brains. They just haven't forgotten it. They keep doing it. And I'm speaking for myself. I sometimes forget. And it was a pleasant reminder.
Well, on that beautiful note, I want to thank Brian Skerry and Raphaelle Thibaut from Secrets of the Whales. You can watch it now on Disney Plus. And for National Geographic and American Cinematheque, I'm Cara Santa Maria. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Cara, and thank you, Brian and Raph.
Thank you so much.
It's been so great to dive into this beautiful series. As Cara said, it's streaming on Disney Plus. If you haven't seen it yet, please seek it out. It has such amazing photography and score thanks to these talented artists here.